We still do 7 NUFC Matters show a week for free. But if you want to help support NUFC Matters, then there are a few ways of doing it. Hit the like button on each live broadcast and video. This helps the channel grow. Hit the subscribe button and select the all notifications bell so you don't miss a single show. If you want to help us financially, then you can join the channel using this button with the membership starting at $1.99 a month. Or you can drop us a donation in the chat using a super sticker. We're also looking for sponsors. If you'd like your brand advertised on the flyers for the show and featured during the ad break, then email john@nufcmatters.com to arrange today.
A big thanks to all our sponsors, Skips and Bins. You can find them at skipsandbins.com or telephone 0800 25 45 25 3. Email inquiries at skipsandbins.com. Website skipsandbins.com. Easy contract free and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Big thanks to Mr. Vicky's Sauces Handmade in Cumbria. You can order them from their website, mrvickys.co.uk, or by telephoning 01768 210 102. A big thanks also to New Workwear. You can find them at newworkwear.com. They're an agile and dedicated workwear provider. Welcome back as well to United Travel. They are a UK coaches firm and they are based in the Northeast. They've got 2024 tours and you can contact them on 01670 632 460 or mobile 0791 666 4174. Email info@unitedgrouptravel.com. And they've got a website, which is unitedgrouptravel.com. There's no strangers on their tours, just people you haven't met yet. Big thanks to them for their sponsorship. Big thanks as well to Media Arts, and they supply all the video technology. If you want to become a member and get a cup, a pen, a membership card, and a scarf, then get your smartphone and put it over this QR code. It will take you straight to the membership pack. It's a £25 one-off fee. You can also go to NUFC Matters website and search membership pack to book today. If you want to help the channel, then subscribe to it by hitting the subscribe button. Hit the thumb up under the video to like the video and click share to share to your other social media. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and other podcast providers. Don't forget, we help the food bank on this channel. If you want to do so virtually, go to nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk and make a donation today. The Alan Shearer raffle is back on. 150 tickets, £1 a ticket. Win a limited edition signed Alan Shearer ball. Enter today at nufcmatters.com.
Critics attack. It feels like I've been talking to myself again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true.
Good afternoon. Welcome along to NUFC Matters. It is the Eddie Howe press conference against Brentford, which takes place tomorrow, 5:30 kickoff. And as always, we give our roundup of what happened at the press conference today and who asked those important questions. Well, first up, as always, was Matthew Raisbeck from BBC Radio Newcastle. And he said after the start that we've had to the season, how has that 2-week layoff been? He knows, of course, Razor, that Eddie would have preferred to have a game straight after that Brighton game just to to blow the cobwebs out and get back to winning ways. And that's what he said. He says, my preference would have been to play straight away after a disappointing result. He says, obviously, we've got an international break, which we've had to deal with. A lot of players have been away. He says, we've only had 12 players working at the club over the last 2 weeks. Obviously, the rest of the players returning from international duty sporadically this week. But he said, we'll work with the 12 and we are looking ahead to the game. Reza then asked him what his conclusions were on the start of the season and on those games so far. He said, look, there's been highs and lows. The performance he felt against Liverpool was very good. Obviously, it was just the dying embers of the game, which, the game got away from us. He said, but Brighton was poor. He felt that maybe Newcastle hadn't recovered from the defeat and the way that they were defeated against Liverpool, the way they started the Brighton game. And he just, maybe it was that knock-on effect. He says it might have been, it might not have been. But overall, he's not too worried. The next batch of games are here and I get the impression that he aims to put it right. How much importance is on this Brentford game was Reza's next question. And he said, look, it's a game we want to do well in. Brentford are a dangerous opponent. They've got obvious threats up front. It's back to us, though. We've got to be at our best and we've got to get the job done. He then asked if Brentford coming to town was what he needed, because obviously they are a good team. They're a pretty good team. And he said sometimes when you play good teams, it brings out the best in Newcastle United. And he said, I can see where you're coming from with that question. He says, but, we've had tough fixtures pre-season. We've had tough fixtures to start the season. Maybe that doesn't work in that way. But he was, he didn't dismiss the question at all. He said, we've got more big games to come. He says the key thing is that, I can see what the lads are doing training. We haven't lost faith in the group as a whole. And, we're confident in our own ability to be able to turn things around and get the job done. So, positive stuff. Reza then wanted to know about injuries. He asked him about Botman. He said he is a possibility for starting tomorrow. He has trained all week, so no issues there. He asked him about Tonali. He said he felt his thigh in training. He's had a scan. He's got a slight injury, but it's nothing too serious. So I guess there will be a decision made on Tonali tomorrow. Anderson, he asked him about him. Obviously, he was in the Scotland squad. Then he was out of the Scotland squad. Again, injury was cited for that departure, although there was much made about the tug of war between Scotland and England. But he said, minor knock, but hope he'll be okay and he should make it as well. Reza then moved on to the Nick Pope situation. He said he received a bit of criticism on social media and in the press after, the first and second goal against Brighton. He says, obviously, I haven't seen those comments. He's not on social media. And he just reiterated what you would expect him to say as a manager, that he's a top goalkeeper. He was a great goalkeeper for us last season. He was part of a back four which had a great defensive record. He was an immense part of that. It's the nature of a goalkeeper's job, though, he said, that, when goals go in against you, that is when you are judged. So that was all for Reza for BBC Radio Newcastle this week. Next up was Keith Downey from Sky. He asked him about the Anderson tug of war between Scotland and England, and he just said, where is he at with his decision? And he said, I can't answer that question. Only Elliot Anderson can discuss it. He's a great pro. He's very motivated. He's a driven player, and I'm sure when he's got a decision, then you'll find out. Keith then asked him about the Bruno situation. He'd heard rumours that Bruno was very close to agreeing a new contract. Eddie said he couldn't confirm that or deny it. He said discussions are ongoing. He says, what I can say is it's not affecting him in any way with his performances, and hopefully there will be a good outcome sooner rather than later. Keith then pushed him and said, how is he within himself? Again, another one of those players that's had a bit of criticism, people saying he's not at his best. And he just said, look, he's been very good. He's been very positive. He's had a good international break because, of course, he's played both games for Brazil and received a lot of plaudits. And again, he just, reminded us that he's a pivotal figure for us, a very important player for Newcastle United moving forward. And, when Bruno's buzzing and playing well, then Newcastle tend to do the same. He then asked him about Steve Harper, of course, who suffered a brain aneurysm during the international break. Asked him how he was. He said, Harps is okay. He's doing well. Obviously, we were shocked to hear about the news. He's been a tower of strength for me. He's educated me about Newcastle United and, the surrounding area. And we wish him well. Good luck in his recovery. Andy Sixsmith was next. And he said, does things, does Steve Harper's situation put things into perspective? And he went, yeah. He says it certainly does. It does put things into perspective. He said, because, last time I saw him, he was fit, he was well, he was upbeat, we were chatting about things. He says, and next thing you know, I'm getting a phone call to say that he's in hospital and, he's taken a turn and he's not in too good a place. So, yeah, he said, it does put things in perspective. Life is more important and, wish him well and hopefully he recovers fully. Andy then segued nicely. He said, does, one win in 7 at the start of last season put your opening games this season into perspective? Good question, Andy. And he said, yeah, because, for me as the manager, there has been a lot of good. It hasn't all been bad. Despite, the fact we won the first game 5-1, then we've lost our next 3 against Man City, of course, Liverpool and Brighton. He says, there's been a lot of twists and turns. He says, but I've remained, as always, remain calm. I am determined to succeed and turn things around. So, a standard answer from Eddie, but a great question from Andy, I thought. He then questioned him on the midfield balance, because again, we're all talking about it. We're talking about it on this podcast. Is the balance right in midfield? Is that what's causing the problems with regards to, Newcastle United's form? That Tonali's been chucked into the middle. We're not playing Longstaff now. Is that unbalance in the team? We've all mentioned it and all had our opinions on it. Eddie brought us back down to earth and more or less said, look, if you'd seen us against Villa, there was no question that this midfield was going to work and it was going to work for the rest of the season. It was a thing of beauty. He says, now fast forward, it's a different opinion. He says, we've had to adapt. We've brought Sandro in. He says, of course, there's going to be an adapting period for him, but let's just see. I guess it comes back to what Eddie said in one of his previous press conferences: judge the signings in a couple of years' time. Don't judge them after 4 or 5 games. It's just not fair. But yeah, it's been a tough season. But well done, Andy. Not as tough, not as bad as it was at the start of last season. Let's see where we are after this next group of games. He then asked him what it was like to start the Great North Run. He just laughed. He said, I misread the weather because obviously he had a black suit on. He says, my arms have just about recovered from, clapping and shaking everybody's hand. And he said, he says, it was great to meet the people of the Northeast, apart from a couple of supporters who, he said, I would guess don't support NUFC. Of course, he was referring to the Sunderland fans who give him a bit of dog's abuse. Andy then asked him about Willock and asked how he was doing physically and mentally. He said, yeah, look, he's been away in Spain this week, a bit of a change of environment for him. Obviously, it was all about the hamstring. Now it's about the Achilles, which came from out the blue, a bit of a shock for everybody. He said he's such a key player. We just, can't wait to have him back available, ready to play again. Andy then asked him about Brentford and said, are they a breath of fresh air to the Premier League? And he went, yeah, because they've done well. He says it's hard to get promoted from the Championship, and then it's equally as hard to stay up. And he said they've got a good style of play. They've got some good players. They're very creative. And yeah, they are a breath of fresh air to the Premier League. So that was Andy's questions, and good to hear good to hear from him on that score. Next up was Mark from the BBC, and he basically just said, look, is Brentford's success down to the recruitment? He went, yeah, look, he said, partly down to the recruitment. They've recruited some good players. He says, but on top of that, you've got a good manager. He says, and they're constantly changing things. They're coming up with, different formations, different patterns of play. And yeah, it is down to, the recruitment, but not only down to that. Mark then said all of the success they've had so far this season has been down to, the back end of last season, start of this season, without Ivan Toney, who's a talisman for them. And he said, yeah, when anybody loses a key player, to continue to play in the same vein and do as well, he says, credit to them for doing that, credit them for doing that. he said they've got dangerous players, Mark, and he said, yeah, look, we don't underestimate Brentford at all. We need to be at our best to beat them. It was 2 tough games we had against them last season, and we expect the same again. And that's the same in the Premier League. Season in, season out. If you let your standards drop, then you're obviously going to have issues. Did it give you time for a reboot in the international break? Was one of Mark's other questions, and he said, yeah, a little bit. He said, look, it was difficult because we only had 12 what you would consider first team players available. Everybody was away on international duty. He says, but we made it work with the pool of players that we had. We enjoyed our 2 weeks. And he then asked the question, which I think we all knew the answer was going to be battered away by Eddie. Looking ahead to the Champions League, are you looking at the team, tomorrow and making those? He said, look, I'm just looking at Brentford. I'm not looking at Milan. One game at a time. And Eddie said that from the day dot since he arrived at St James's Park. Simon O'Rourke was up next from Time Tees. How excited are you about the Champions League? He said, following on from Mark's question, which got battered away. What kind of, how's it going to affect your season? It was that kind of question. And he just said, look, it's not a massive change. He says, of course it's a change, but we will deal with it. It's a slightly longer flight, for example, to Milan than it would be to fly down to London, for example. But again, he says, we'll focus on the Champions League after the Brentford game. I'm reluctant to speak about, Milan. That was it, really, for Simon. Didn't get another question in. Simon Bird, though, from the Daily Mirror was next. Are you going to have to be a bit more ruthless? Are you going to have to be a bit more ruthless with the team this year? As in, rotation, that kind of thing. And, his last season performances from players, I guess what Simon was saying, going to affect your decisions. Are you going to do favours for those who didn't let you down last season is the point he was trying to get across. And he went, look, it's always a balance. I don't judge players on last year. I judge players on the last performance, which, to be honest, judging them on the Brighton game is he's not going to have to be ruthless. He could drop anybody. Let's face it. He said, but it doesn't always work like that. He says, let's look back at the Liverpool game, for example. He says it was a deceiving result because until right in the death of that game, we were playing very, very well. We had the game in our hand. And you won't make wholesale changes as a manager to something that's not broken. So quite clever the way that he described that, because ultimately he's pointing to the fact that, that's the reason that the team against Brighton was the team against Brighton, because he didn't feel that the defeat against Liverpool was justified. We should have hung on. Of course we should have. You can't justify for a goal going in off someone's backside and, robbing at least a point off you. So that was his answer to that. And I agree. I do think there'll be changes tomorrow. He then went on to Longstaff. Simon Bird went on to Longstaff. He actually said, players like Sean Longstaff have missed out this season after he did so well last season. Should we look out for the inclusion of some of those that you've worked with in the international break? And of course, Longstaff's one of them. Eddie doesn't bite at this, but he gave what I would call a frosty answer. Well, that's the way I interpreted it anyway. And he just said, look, Sean was injured in pre-season. He wasn't moved out of the team. He didn't miss out. But he was recovering from injury. Now he's returning to full fitness. He's going to be available for selection. So we left it at that. Craig Hope from the Daily Mail was next. And he said, was it a fine balance in the transfer window? This is the first time we've seen you since the transfer window closed. Was it a fine balance for you this season? He says, between signing players for the now and signing players for the future. And he said there was no conscious decision to do either. He said, our transfer windows are dominated and formed, by a lot of people. He says, you've got to remember as well, it's down to funds. And it's also down to where we need to recruit. But overall, I am pleased with the window. So there we go. That was a simple answer to a simple question. He also asked about Bruno. He says, could you assess the opening weeks that he's had? He said, look, Bruno has made some valuable contributions. But hopefully this week that he's had with Brazil, where he's played both games, done very well, been influential on the pitch, will give him a lift and spark him into life. And again, just reiterated how invaluable he is to Newcastle United, and the engine room in that midfield. Next up was Scott from the Northern Echo, and he said, you've got a whole new schedule now. How are you looking forward to the challenge? Again, going back to the Champions League, which Eddie'd already said he wasn't really going to talk about. He said, look, it is going to be a bit difficult. He says, but it's not a huge difference. And he said, ultimately for us, we're preparing for teams again, games against European teams, as opposed to against Premier League teams. And he said, yes, there's a bit of travel, but at the end of the day, when you get there, it's a game of football. So it's not as big a challenge. It's not as big a challenge as everyone's trying to make out, is what he was saying. Then Scott said there is a theory suggesting that Newcastle benefited from not having European games last season, and that's why they finished so high up the table. And he went, again, just reiterated that, of course, it's a huge challenge. I'm not underestimating it. He says, but a lot of it depends on, player availability. He says, if we can train with a full group, it's better. He says, but look, we will get injuries, we will get suspensions. We've just got to adapt to the circumstances we find ourselves in. Luke Edwards was up next, and he just said, do you want to describe the error of wearing the black suit for the Great North Run? And he said, well, it was a black blazer. He says, I had a top, like a shirt, like a towel shirt underneath. He said, but my response to this is, he says, when I got up, it was foggy and it was cold when I got up, and I thought the black jacket was the right decision. He says, but I ended up sweating. I couldn't take my jacket off, and the rest is history. Luke moved on from his humorous question and said, how important is it that you stay level-headed when things aren't going according to plan? And he said, yeah, look, it's one of my strengths. He said, when things go against you, when things are difficult, I don't get swayed by it. And he said this before, when things go well, he doesn't get carried away by it either. So, he finds that middle ground. He said, but it's a strength. He says, I see things for what they are. He says, the last three results haven't been good. He says, but there have been some good moments. And he says, the key to last season's success was we stayed consistent. We played consistently well. And he's a strong believer that we will get back to that, which is great. How has Callum Wilson been doing? Sitting on the bench, Luke asked. He said, because they've seen in the documentary, of course, that, he's not happy when he's on the bench. But, of course, he's actually not happy when he's on the bench. Who is? But has he been okay not starting games? And he went, yeah, look, he has been good. He's been good around the group. He's been supportive. He says, I can't swear, can I? Well, you did on the documentary, Eddie. But he just said, look, he's been eager to play. He has got his own individual motivations, and he's in the frame. So, he could start tomorrow. That for me was a bit of a pointer. I think Wilson will start tomorrow. I think Isak will have a rest. Lee Ryder was next. He said, obviously you've got a game this Saturday. He says, but it works both ways. AC, you've got to play it into this Saturday. So, it's level pegging going into this game on Wednesday. You went, yeah, we're both in the same position. But, we're not looking at that. We're looking at Brentford. And he also said, but look, let's just remember that being in the Champions League is the reward for last season's endeavours. Lee then mentioned Brentford being a dangerous opponent. They won't sit back. He said he watched the last game where they drew 2-2 and, they seem to be on the front foot. He went, yeah, they're not going to sit back. They're more front foot this year than they were last year. He said they've got big strengths. He said that we need to combat. And again, he does it every week. Eddie said we need the crowd. He says the crowd is going to be important for us. And he made special mention to the away support at Brighton. He said they were fantastic, Brighton, despite the result. And, he said they're going to be very important tomorrow for us in our game. Lee then asked him about Longstaff. Would he be straight in if Tonali was unavailable? He's not going to answer that question. He just said, look, we've got plenty of options in midfield, but he is a possibility. Dominic was next. Asked the cheeky question, which you might have already seen covered on things like Sky, and that was about Trippier. Said he played well as left back for England. Is that a position you could see him playing at Newcastle? And he just said, look, he's a versatile player. He's played there well for England. And never say never. We always look at different options. He then asked him about Emil Kraft because he's on the last legs, I guess, to recovery. And he said, yeah, look, it's early days, but it's great to see him back in training, if you like, not full training, of course, but the group are happy to see him, and he's a big character in the squad. And He then asked him about the Champions League squad. Was it difficult and a tough decision to have to leave people out? And he said, yeah, look, it is a difficult decision for us to leave people out. But, those conversations weren't easy conversations. But obviously, we have to follow the rules and it was tough. But, those conversations were made and that's that. Oscar was next from the Sun. He asked if the midfield three, Tonali, Bruno, Joe Linton, is balanced in his view. And he said, look, they've all got qualities. But, they're not the only three that I can pick. And he says, each week we are constantly looking at, the formations and what we can do and what we can't do. So, again, he's not going to criticize his midfield three that he started with in all the games so far, is he? But he is aware that he's got, potential to change it. And if Tonali's out, he's going to have to change it. What does Longstaff provide, says Oscar. He said he's got endurance, he's tremendously fit, he's got a great brain, and he's got a great range of passing. I think if Tonali is out, I think Longstaff's a shoe-in tomorrow, to be fair. Jacob is next up, and he was the final journalist this morning in a slightly shorter press conference, only lasted 26 minutes. He said the Carabao Cup final led to a bad run of results because of the distraction that it caused. He says, well, I've talked about in the past. Do you think the Champions League games on the and all the fuss around the Champions League is maybe done the same at the start of your season? And Eddie quick to deny that. He said, I don't think so. He says, we've just come up against some good teams and we haven't been in our best at times. He said, but again, there's been some good moments. He said, but I don't see us. I don't think we've had any early season distractions. He says, but now we're in a different period and now we've got to deal with the now. And that's the best way to look at it. How do you get that message over to the players was Jacob's final question. How do you stop the players from being distracted? And he said a lot of it comes from us, but the players have to do their own motivation as well. He says, but our messages, my coach's messages, and the daily work are important. He says, we can't control what the players hear from the outside, but internally we can control what they hear. So that was it. Quite a short press conference, really. And that is the Eddie Howe press conference for the Brentford game. I'm back at 5:00 with the Amigos live. Hi to Kevin, who's in Lakeland, Florida. Hi to Les. Hi to Gary. Hi to Andrew. Hi to Stephen, who's asking why there's no video. This is the format we do. Yes, thank you for answering that, Les. Just because I've got to read the notes, and it looks really rude me reading all the notes that I've made and not looking at the screen. So that's why I do it this way. And I do often go through the chat, Les. But yeah, great stuff. Thanks for joining us. That is Eddie Howe's press conference review for this week. Let's hope it's 3 points. I will be back at 5:00 live with George, Steve, and Mitch with the three Amigos. Take care. See you then.